Good evening, guys. Welcome to Great God Debates, Ocals TV, Great God Debates. I am driving at the moment, which is something I usually do for my Ocals TV Drive Days video. And I'm not sure how often I'll end up driving with these, but it seems to make sense for this particular video because I'm on the way to an Alpha course. Now, for those of you that don't know what an Alpha course is, it's a Christian-led course that it's run in many churches around the UK and I think the world now as well. And it's basically a beginner's course, if you like, in Christianity. For those that are interested to find out more about it and see whether they will accept Jesus, I guess. Now, it was my choice to go, and based on the previous video that I shared, you might think that was an odd choice in a way, but because I've said, you know, I no longer believe in God, I'm no longer a Christian, I no longer believe that I have good reason to believe, and I'm going because I'm just interested in what people have to say. And it's not because I feel as though I have a God-shaped hole in my heart or any of that stuff, which I'm sure people will say if they believe that, and it's certainly something I would have said when I was a believer myself. You know, it could well be that I have a God-shaped hole in my heart, or, you know, metaphorically speaking, but I don't believe it because I've got no reason, as far as I can tell, to believe that that's the case. But I'm interested in what people have to say. I'm interested to see if there's any new information, because I've done quite a lot of digging and research over the past nearly 2 years, as I mentioned in the last video, and I've found the evidence for the supernatural and Jesus and the supposed resurrection to be severely lacking, despite what we can be told by lots of Christian apologetics, lots of Christian sources, which is where I used to get much of my information from. Just as a side note, I'm sorry that it's particularly dark. I haven't got, I mean, I could turn my light on, but I don't think I'm technically allowed to do that in the car whilst I'm driving. So this Alpha course then, this is the third week out of a 10-week course. I think it's supposed to be 11, they say, but they're going to do the last 2 videos in the last week, so they said last week. So it's the third one, and basically the setup of this particular group is we go and we have a meal together, and then we watch a video, and then we discuss it basically. And last week the discussion was around, is there any historical evidence for Jesus existing? Now, I was hoping very much that there was going to be new information that I hadn't looked into before. Now, what they discussed initially was the supposed extra-biblical, sort of outside the Bible evidence, because by and large the Bible itself, whilst lots of people try to use it as evidence, as far as I can tell, the Bible itself is the claim, it's not the evidence. You can't really use, or you shouldn't really use, the Bible as evidence for the Bible. It's a circular way of trying to argue things. But I went last week, and they started off by sharing what they thought was extra biblical evidence, and they used the often quoted Tacitus and Josephus, and there are some others, but those are the main ones that are quoted, and they use the fact that they have mentioned Jesus in history as evidence for Jesus. I mean, it used to be convincing, and I think one of the things that I did say in that meeting was I can see how it would be convincing if you sort of hadn't done any additional research, and it's certainly something I was convinced of in the past before I had. But the problem is with the this external evidence, as it were, is these are historians who aren't contemporaries, or would not have been contemporaries rather, of this Jesus. They were born after the supposed death of Jesus, and any sort of writings that they have about Jesus are only about what believers believed about this Jesus. Literally, that's what they are. They're not contemporaries. They're not people who can say, yes, I hung out with this guy called Jesus, and it's used as evidence. I find it incredibly bizarre that their focus is talking about what people have said, what people believe. So that doesn't necessarily mean that it's evidence that Jesus existed. By no means does it do that, as far as I can tell, and yet it's used as evidence. I'm just going to adjust this to see if we can get a bit more of my head in. And yeah, so it is used in that way. As I said before, it would have been convincing for me, but I no longer find that to be convincing. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't know if I said in my first video, but I'm not one of these people who is a Jesus mythicist as such. I don't necessarily believe that somebody called Jesus didn't exist. I'm quite happy to accept that maybe that's the case, but just because a person who may have been called Jesus may have existed says nothing about the supposed divine nature of somebody, not in the slightest. So how that is in any way evidence towards that it boggles my mind now. So I find that boggling, really, in many ways, as I say. And then they go on to, assuming that that's in the bag, the extra, and then they go on to talk about evidence in the Bible. So they go to use circular arguments. They say, well, the Bible says this, therefore it must be true. And one of the things that they mentioned was about all the supposed prophecies that Jesus fulfilled. Again, I used to believe all of this, thought, how can you account for all the prophecies that Jesus fulfilled? I'm not so sure that Jesus fulfilled these prophecies, but one of the things they said was, yeah, sure, Jesus could have known about what was in the Old Testament and chose to do those things as a way of fulfilling them. And it's a fairly good point, but still something that we can talk about. They said, well, Jesus couldn't have possibly predicted where he was going to be born. He couldn't have possibly predicted when he was going to die. And all of these things was like, well, yeah, we can make you think maybe Jesus couldn't have manipulated that. No, but for a start, in fact, maybe all of them, but many Old Testament prophecies are quite vague, really, in what sort of they say. I mean, by his stripes we are healed, from Isaiah. That doesn't actually say anything that Jesus dying would mean that those stripes are anybody's healing, because anybody could die and you could say, well, they fulfilled that prophecy. That's so vague, and it doesn't even talk about death. It just says by his stripes we are healed. Okay, but no, Jesus could not, if he did indeed exist, have this has gone even darker, my apologies. He could not have manipulated the birth and death, but the writers certainly could have done. Yeah, it's funny because we talk about, oh, Jesus would have studied the Bible, the Old Testament, he would have known about that, so he would have known about it. So he would have known about stuff that he could have then manipulated himself. But so would the writers of these New Testament books. They would have known about the stories in the Old Testament, so it's not surprising, and it would have been easy for them to have written that in to their stories. They could have said he was born in Nazareth, he was born of, that's easy, really. And actually, the fact that I will go into more detail in other videos, but the fact that some of the Gospels don't agree with each other on the genealogy of Jesus because they try to tackle a different audience, is so it's said, shows that actually, do you know what, the fact that they are trying to engage a different audience and they're not necessarily given the same genealogy sort of suggests that actually they are simply making a story to fit really. And there is an interesting point about the census that is mentioned in the Bible as well. The census when Mary and Joseph had to move towns because the king at the time was going to kill all the firstborn and stuff like that, and so they had to take a census. Well, I have since read that actually no such census existed at that time in which Jesus was supposedly born. That didn't come into play until years later. And so again, that's telling of a story that's been manipulated to try to create this narrative that they wanted, really. And I mentioned some of these things, and I mentioned that, you know what, it's not like I don't want to. I mean, I wanted to engage. I love this sort of type of debate, but one guy's his response to me was, "You're just being negative." I mean, it's like, I'm being negative, really? I'm literally engaging in discussion. I mean, I can't. It wouldn't be right and honest for me to just say, yeah, that makes sense, and not engage in that process if I seem to have a reason for not thinking that what they're saying is entirely accurate. If I think they've missed things out, then I feel as though I'm obliged really to share that information with people. And it's very easy to be accused of being negative when it might seem as though I'm attacking your point of view. I'm not. I'm simply attacking the arguments, or engaging with the argument. I'm not attacking you. But anybody, I mean, you know, if we sort of flipped this around, and you know, a Christian was talking to a Muslim, and the Muslim was trying to say, yes, but this, and the other, a Christian would be quite right, or anybody would be, in saying, but this, but that, but are you sure about that? Blah, 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 blah. It's not automatically being negative. It's saying, I understand what you're saying, however, have you thought about this? And it would be absolutely right of somebody to question something if they're unsure, if they think there's an issue, if they think there may be some error. I mean, it's not negative, but honestly, I thought that was a bit uncomfortable last week, being accused of being negative when all I'm trying to do is share my thoughts. But you know what, I'm going there now for the week 3, and this week is talking about why did Jesus die. It'll be an interesting week, I think, because as far as I'm concerned, we haven't fully established that Jesus lived. So to ask the question, why did he die, is interesting. As I said, I've got no issues with the possibility that a guy called Jesus existed. And one of the questions, by the way, that I was asked was, well, and you would accept then that the majority of historians believe that, accept that he did. And my response was, well, no, because actually that's what we hear from Christian sources, from Christian apologetics. But if you look at the wider field, that's not necessarily the case. It's not necessarily what's been said, or the majority viewpoint. It's not necessarily the case. But regardless, I've probably gone on for long enough now, longer than my first video, I think, in the dark, so I hope you can at least hear me enough. Be interested to see what this week is about. As I said, as far as I'm aware, we haven't established that Jesus definitely lived, so as for why he died, I'm not quite sure where we're going to get this information from other than what the Bible says. And as I said, the Bible, as far as I'm concerned, is the claim and not the evidence, so there may be some more circular reasoning, and if that's the case, then I'd like to talk about it without being accused of being negative. But hey ho, there we go. Anyway, thank you for listening, thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe if you like the video, subscribe if you haven't already, and I would love it if you could share the video so that this information can get out to more people. And please comment below. If you disagree with me, please say. I'm really interested in what people's thoughts are. I'm quite happy to accept that I could be wrong about this. Absolutely. I'm by no means an expert. I'm very much a lay person. Please give me some food for thought if you have an alternative viewpoint. If you agree with me, also share it as well, and you know, give me some sources that I can take a look at. But there we go, I'll end it there. I'm nearly sort of at the place I need to be at. And I will see you next time. See you later, bye bye.